Well, betting on baseball. This episode was supposed to start and talk about the history of betting on baseball, but just this week, the Alabama baseball coach was fired because he may, and we don't know for sure yet, have bet big on LSU when they were playing Alabama.
So he Pete Rosed himself.
Again, this is all allegedly, but
So
the
is
fact that
Pete
they let him
Rose.
go, so is not good. And so I don't even think of it happening at the collegiate level now. But the betting on sports in general, right? It goes way beyond the pro games, and it's amazing to the degree that every single contest you can look at is going to have a betting line today.
I mean, you look at it, the Super Bowl might be the most bet on single event in
I think
the
it is,
world.
yeah.
And March Madness is probably the most bet on overall event in the world. But you look at baseball now, and I mean, even on the Mets, during the games now, like during a Mets broadcast, we get live odd updates during the game. And that's something I never remember happening before 2020, certainly.
Right, and so
Maybe.
that right in the game you're seeing the changes, not only the original line that might have been at the beginning of the game, as one of the statistics that you might see on screen, and we're seeing more and more statistics.
Right. Now you're seeing it's like, oh, okay, well, now it's in the sixth inning. Here's the updated over-under for the rest of the game, or here's the updated line for the game, Not to talk about, with all the apps and stuff, you have all the prop betting that you can do on top of that.
So every sport has this, right?
Right.
And you go back to having to go to a casino to place a bet on a sporting event, and this, like you mentioned, the Super Bowl, and so that was something like my cousin lives in Las Vegas, and so back in the day, you call Jeff and have him put a bet on the game for me,
And just to be clear, this was actually a cousin, not just a guy.
It
called
really
Cousin
is.
Jeff, because if you hear that story, you think it's just some guy.
So and then of course you had illegal bookies, or there are no legal bookies, are there?
I think by extension of being a bookie, it's somewhat illegal.
And I also remember as a kid that off-track betting started in New York, and I looked that up. I didn't remember that much. But 1970, so the people wanted to bet on horse races so much that they created these really seedy parlors where people would go in and bet on the horses, and they would be going all day because races are all over the country at different times. And yeah, that was kind of like one of the
And I think that's
unsavory places to be.
But I think the change over from baseball and sport gambling being something that was traditionally done in places like that, or through shady, quote unquote, bookies, or going to Vegas to actually have to place a bet. You don't have that anymore. You've essentially whitewashed it all with these corporate entities like DraftKings and Sports FanDuel, because you could just do it through them, and your hope is that it's a lot easier to trust rightly or wrongly. It's a lot easier to trust a corporation like one of those than to trust Cousin Jeff.
We don't really know who's running these companies
No.
or if they're connected in any way. We assume, I guess, as people that they're not, and they're regulated, and there's lots of regulation on these platforms. Although the explosion of them and their success just shows you the insatiable appetite for gambling that the American public has.
And I think it's led to sort of a new breed of a sports fan. And it's not everybody, and there's nothing wrong with how you enjoy games, but there's definitely people you could talk with that if you ask them stats and stat lines for any given player, they would know them, no doubt. They probably know the backup shortstops on bad teams. But if they're actually a fan of the game is a different question, because I think there's a lot of people that are just fans out there of gambling, and if it wasn't sports betting, they would find something else to go bet it on.
But as long as the stakes are high in baseball, I think you're not going to lose those fans. But the premise here is that are those fans the same kinds of fans as like you and me?
And I don't think they're not lesser, but they're not the same.
They're not the same, right? And so when I go to the game and watch the game, or even on TV, we talked about how I may watch it differently than you, but neither of us are watching it because we've got a bet on the game, nor are we watching our series of bets we have on the other 4 games we might have bet that day.
I mean, for me, it's hard enough for me to watch my given sports team lose. Like, it is physically difficult for me to watch the Mets or the Knicks lose a game. I couldn't imagine what it would be like if I had $100 riding on that game. I would be a mess. I would never be able to do it. It's why I don't sports bet.
Yeah, and so it's a rabbit hole that the sports betting companies are counting on certain people going down. I mean, that is the reason that baseball has so much support, is the game has embraced gambling in a way that they never have before.
Let's put it this way. If it wasn't an issue, they wouldn't need to put a disclaimer on it saying to do it in moderation. I mean, think about some of those sports bet, like those DraftKings commercial where like the guy comes in and he's just like, "What's your system, man?" Like the entire implication is that other guy is totally losing his mind over gambling and is going to do bad things, and that's the joke in the commercial.
Well, and that the idea that we've replaced the bookies, as you say, with these legitimate betting platforms, so everybody can feel better about it now. You know, you can feel better about betting, and it's fun, right? I raise $100 here, and by the way, betting $100 is not like it was years ago when I was a kid. To me, as an older person, it still seems like a lot of money, even though I know that it isn't.
The issue is that there's a lot of people that will bet, and $100 on a baseball game is not a lot to them. But there's too many that are betting that $100, and that is a lot of money to them, and they can't afford to lose it, and they're still gonna bet it. And I think that, not that anything is inherently wrong with gambling. It's fun. I like going to the casino. I like playing card games, but it's just there's something really weird to me about especially with baseball. Because it's taken easily the most hardline anti-gambling stance of any sport throughout its history. The Black Sox, Pete Rose. And I know I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. It feels really hypocritical to have the Oakland Athletics presented by DraftKings as a team in your league, but then not have Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame.
And then, of course, the Oakland A's are going to become the Las Vegas A's.
Right, yeah. Which is just weird because, I mean, for years you wouldn't put a team in Vegas for fear of what might happen. Now you're putting a team in Vegas because you want that thing to happen. You want people to gamble.
And when we're talking about what might happen is always the question, is the game being played on the level?
And right now, there's absolutely nothing to suggest that it isn't, but you already look, and there's a coach at Alabama betting against his team.
That's unbelievable, by the way, that somebody could actually...
Maybe he did. This is still being investigated.
Right.
But now, if he bet on Alabama, does it make it better? I guess he didn't sell out his kids.
Well, that's what Pete Rose would tell you, is that he never bet against the Reds.
Right.
So that was his defense. And of course, you don't know.
No, right. But, okay, if you're really good at something, when somebody is better than you at something. So if that coach was just like, you know what? I love my boys. They ain't beating LSU. And then he just bets on LSU because he's like, look, if we're going to lose today, I might as well get some cheddar off.
I think in this case, the article I read is the starting pitcher came up with an injury just before the game, a tight back. And so he started somebody else. And right. So that became in question. Gee, why did he make that kind of late switch? And that's anything, because we talked about this off air as well. The odds makers are so good at getting the line right that if somebody comes up lame 15 minutes before the game and can't pitch, chances are the odds makers won't have any advanced knowledge of that.
Right. But it's the kind of thing where, do the odds makers get a little bit of inside knowledge that, maybe a Scherzer or a Verlander coming off the plane is feeling a little under the weather. He's going to pitch. There's no injury report. But he's not rocking at 100%.
Yeah, I don't know if that comes from, in those kinds of conversations, talking with people on the team, officials on the team. The officials on the team are very keenly aware of what they can't say, particularly when it comes to player injuries.
Right. But there's a lot of people you can talk to. And all you have to do is know who to, you don't need to talk to, you could talk to the flight attendants. You could talk to the guys at the luggage claim. All you got to do is get a couple of them and be like, oh, yeah, no, he didn't look good. And boom, you now know there's an inside track on the game.
Because there's a lot of money to be made here for everybody. And so we're firmly understanding that this is not going away. What's troubling to me, and I think you expressed it similarly, is that some fans are more interested in the status of their bets than the actual goings-on of the game itself. And like you said, they know what's going on because they have a bet in the game. So they're smart, right? They're going to understand the percentages and who's likely to do better and all that stuff. But ask them what a hit-and-run play might be, they may not know.
Yeah, we were joking. It's just like, okay, so the pitcher went up and in on the first two pitches with some high heat. The guy fouled off a couple balls, and now he's looking at 1 and 2 pitch. What do you think he does? And to them, that would be you're speaking a foreign language. Where for a lot of baseball fans, you'd be like, oh, you either come back up and in with a fastball, you go low and away with an off speed.
That's what baseball people know.
That's what baseball people would know. But somebody that is a fan of betting first and sports second, the bet is what they're there for. They're there to gamble. And sports is just the avenue they're expressing that with.
And baseball is one of the oldest sports in some respects, and the betting has been going on in baseball since they first started playing baseball. There's evidence of stuff going on in 1877 and scandals and betting, and when the teams were just starting to be real legitimate pro teams in 1876.
If there's a competition, people are gonna want to wager on it. Like that's just people are gonna. It's just fun. It makes it more exciting. You're already rooting for your Mets to win, and now when your Mets win, you win. Actually.
And so, and like we said, it doesn't happen just in baseball. Tennis has got this kind of stuff going on around it too, and guys have been definitely suspended from the tour or whatnot for throwing like a match in Ecuador in the third round. Like
right.
no one's paying attention to it.
Right, exactly. Those are the ones that are really dangerous. Like in a solo sport like tennis, where it's just one-on-one. It's not the big matches you got to worry about being fixed because nobody cares about those. It's the match between the world 150 and 187 that maybe the 150 guy randomly takes a dive because nobody's paying attention to that match. It's just a statistical note.
But they do pay attention, and this is how you could always tell, and a card counter in the casino, that wasn't a very good one, or a gambler. You make too big a bet at a step with what's normal.
Right.
So all of a sudden, and the guy, the Alabama coach, apparently did exactly that. The big money came in a space where it normally wouldn't go, so that caused a flag to be raised, and when they looked into it, now this guy's connected to it.
Right.
And so so if you try to beat the system by, having a guy throw a match or something like that, and you bet too big, all of a sudden undue attention comes to it.
Especially when it's like, if you're the number one team, if you're the best team in baseball and you randomly take a dive in a game against the Tigers, that's kind of hard to pick up. If you get swept, that's a little bit easier to notice something's up, too.
Well, if you could bet a sweep, like let's say you would have bet the Tigers to sweep the Mets in the series last week in Detroit, you could have gotten pretty great odds on that not happening.
Right.
So and it did happen, unfortunately. And I don't even know if they'll take bets on just about anything, but I know the basic baseball bets, and let's talk about that, right? So you've got the run differential bet. Right, so if you're -2.5 or +2.5,
that's not as common, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either.
I think the line
used to be though. Yeah. That was the one that you would read, and now it's sort of, as you said, gone into the -110 versus +150, which means,
and then you're either you get 110, you need to bet 100 to get 100.
No, you got to bet 110 to get 100,
and you got to get
you bet 100, you win 150.
And I think it's just interesting, in comparison, looking at that to. You have the whole system with the line betting, and that's what people do. But because you have these apps that everybody's betting through, if you called up your cousin Jeff and placed a bet through him, it was done. It wasn't like you called him up in the middle of the game and placed another one. But now...
But you can.
You can, but you didn't really do that.
Not in those days.
And it was also different because Jeff would also have to figure out what the bets to make were. Now you got it on your phone. And you could be...
Well, Jeff wasn't a bookie, right?
He was
he's my cousin. So the point is that the bookie, you probably could call in a bet in the middle of the game as long as you're willing to take whatever odds they were giving
right,
you.
But the bookie's not calling you up and being like, hey, I got a push bet in the 6th inning. Nimmo get a hit here. Bet. And that's what worries me with the apps and stuff. And because I was also thinking the other major form of baseball gambling is daily fantasy.
Yeah, if you're playing for money.
If you're playing for money, right. And that's what there's no daily fantasy leagues, let's put it this way, there's no daily fantasy leagues that aren't playing for money.
True. I've played for money, not a lot of money, but you're still playing for money.
You're still playing for money, right. That's the whole thing with the daily fantasy things. And the interesting thing about that is people don't think of that as gambling.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's fine. By the way,
it's fine, yeah.
But
there's a categorical difference in their head between playing daily fantasy and actually betting on the game.
So when I did go to Sportsbook in Vegas when I was there a couple of years ago, and it's so different than it used to be because it was a big casino in the old days with a tiny little room that might have been like where you couldn't even find to bet on sports. But now it's this giant room with TVs.
I mean, I remember
and places to sit down.
When I was in Vegas, we were in Vegas a couple of years ago, and me and my buddies were sitting at a Gordon Ramsay's restaurant in one of the casinos, and basically right outside of us was the sports betting area, which was just an entire wall of every single sport being broadcasted with the lines
with a huge board of odds and
constantly rotating.
So one of the things that I found that I didn't know is that there was a bet there where you could bet the team to be ahead after 5 innings. Didn't have to win the game. And so let's say that your pitcher's on the mound. He doesn't go far into the game, but you know he's really good for 5 or 6 innings. You would get different odds, right, if you bet the winner because you think, oh, they're probably going to be a hit after 5. We don't know what happened after that.
So this is where my stupid brain goes with that. I'm like, I wonder if that would be less popular, the 5-inning bet, after the pitch clock. Because I also think part of the reason and the nice thing about the 5-inning bet,
it's still around.
You don't have to watch the whole game.
Right. Or at least follow the whole game.
You have to follow. You're out after 5 innings.
Or you could have 2 bets. You could have a 5-inning bet and have a second bet and have the whole game bet. So, that definitely that's, the way people do things. And I just thought, wow, that's a clever bet because it's sort of interesting. And it won't have the same odds as the game. That's the point I'm making.
Right, because that takes away certain strengths and weaknesses from some team, especially when you're betting on single game outcomes. If you're betting on a Diamondback game, if you're only betting the first 5 innings, that's a very different game when you get a bet on Zach Allen than somebody else.
And you would hope that the major league players police themselves to a degree, right? Because I'm sure there's a strict no betting policy that the teams mention to the players repeatedly about making sure that they don't do that.
My guess is if the player... Now, there was a whole bunch of NFL guys that were just suspended for betting...
On NFL games.
Exactly. I think the players will police themselves. And
that's where it has to start, as far as I'm concerned.
Betting against themselves. That's, I think, as far as we'll go.
It's a slippery slope, so you don't want a guy to bet at all because if it goes bad, then the likelihood of them trying something becomes greater than if not.
Right. They will. But
doesn't mean it's going to happen.
I know the line. My guess is I bet because I know there are definitely guys that are gambling across all professional sports in baseball. There's
on their sport.
Maybe not on their sport.
Right. I would definitely see them betting other sports.
100%.
Because that's just the way they're
But
built.
I think if they're going to bet on their sport, I got to think the line crossing is betting against yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's
or your team.
It's one thing to bet on yourself to win. Guys probably don't love that, but you can trust that guy is going to give you 100%.
I'm going to be naive in this instance.
Nobody's doing it?
I want to believe that this is not happening in Major League Baseball, at least, that players are not betting against their own team.
I want to believe that,
in fact, I doubt they're betting the baseball games at all. Could there be a Major League player betting on games?
Do you think they were betting the World Baseball Classic? Do they bet the postseason if they're not in it?
I don't know. Oh, that's another good question. Well, they just shouldn't bet on baseball at all.
But it's interesting.
The World Baseball Classic isn't a major league event, so I could almost try to see my way to thinking that would be
you're
okay.
A guy that was eliminated in the last game of the season. Why can't you bet on the World Series?
Because you shouldn't.
Exactly. But immediately
you should because you don't want to call your friend up
and because once you do the first bet, every bet
it's a slippery slope
becomes easier.
And I hope the baseball players understand that too. Going, I could probably control it and have it not go bad.
The other thing, they're also players are going to be very aware of it because any player that has any kind of shot at a postseason, post-career stuff isn't going to bet because they don't want to be the next Pete Rose.
Right, and
if you're Clayton Kershaw, why would you ever potentially mess up your Hall of Fame career?
I just don't see them doing it, and I guess Pete Rose is emblematic. Although his lack of apologies is probably as responsible for his not getting in the Hall of Fame as anything else. He was really unapologetic about it, and always has been. So I think there's a difference there.
Right. I just think that betting on baseball is the kind of thing that it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to stop. But I think it just raises the question of, is this the avenue that we want to be pushing so much for the game? Do we want to be having line cut-ins to update people on the odds during a sports broadcast? And I know why the studios are doing it, because people are interested.
Cut to shot of horse leaving barn.
Right. It's already happened.
Right.
It's not going away.
It's not going away. And so what I'm hoping is, like I said, that the players aren't doing it at all. The game is on the level. I feel that it is.
Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any suggestion.
I have no reason that. So and it needs to stay that way because I love the game that way, and a lot of people do without the gambling aspect of it.
And I'll say I am much less concerned about umpires being able to rig or fix the outcome of an individual game compared to NFL or are NBA refs. Those guys have much more significant impacts on the flow of a game comparatively.
Well, that will be even more so when there's automatic balls and strikes.
Right. You basically remove the umpires.
From at least that kind of decision making. And I think that's true when it comes to how they can have an impact on the game. But they are as responsible for I hate the term integrity of the game
as anything else.
But yes, that's what it is. Of keeping it up. So I hope the fans that watch baseball and are betting on the game can understand just to make sure that they're enjoying the contest and not just the experience of having a wager.
If you can't watch a baseball game without betting on it, you're probably not a baseball fan.